So many back problems start with weak and stiff hips, and that's especially true for golfers. If your hips don't lead the way in the golf swing, it's tough to get that fluid, effortless swing that creates the easy power that we're all looking for, but it's that fluid, effortless swing that also reduces injury risk and reduces injury risk to our back, which is what we're talking about now. Now, it's no coincidence that swing flaws, back problems, and hip function are connected. And here's what I mean. If your hips don't lead the way in the golf swing, that means if your hips don't lead the way into your backswing and into your downswing and through impact, it's really tough to create the rotation that you need without compensating. You should be getting the rotation in the golf swing from your hips, your T-spine, and your shoulders. And of course, you know, your feet are moving, but really the rotation is coming from the joints, but not the lumbar spine. The lumbar spine is not set up to rotate like your hips, your T-spine, and your shoulders. So at address, we hip hinge back, we lean a little forward, and we're tilted away from the target. Now, what the rotation should look like when you start, so you've shifted your weight onto your rear foot, you've put some pressure into this foot on the inside of this foot, and this hip goes into internal rotation and extends backwards. So from the side, it looks like this, right? We hip hinge back, we lean a little forward, we tilt away from the target. As we begin our takeaway, we shift a little to the rear, we put force and pressure on the inside of the rear foot, the hip goes backwards, it extends backwards, and we go into internal rotation. So the rotation force I'm placing into this joint, right? The joint is meant to move. I'm putting rotation into this joint. Now, on the backswing, on the takeaway, if you're stuck, if you don't have this capacity to rotate, well, you got to get rotation from someplace, and your body's going to compensate. And it's likely it's going to compensate for the lack of rotation in your hips into your lumbar spine. So we're stuck here. Well, even if we move backwards a little bit, even if we put force into the inside of onto the inside of our rear foot, if we're stuck here, well, we have to rotate, so we're going to rotate like this. And that's going to be putting force into your lumbar spine. So we're going to hip hinge back, tilt away from the target, shift to the rear, and now we can't quite get this, so we're just going to kind of rotate into our lumbar spine. That's an injury waiting to happen. Now, on the downswing and into impact, as you come into impact, you've rotated, this hip is driving, or this foot is driving forcefully into the ground, and this hip is extending backwards, and we go into internal rotation so that your ankle, knee, hip, and shoulder create one line. So at impact, it should look something like this, where we've rotated, our hands are ahead of the club head, that's important, right? And we're rotating into internal rotation, and our hip is extending backwards, and we have one line at impact. If you don't do that, it's going to be the same thing as the same problem as you had on your takeaway and backswing. If you're stuck here and you continue to rotate, you're going to rotate into your lumbar spine, and there's a lot of force coming into that downswing, so that's going to be even worse on your back than in the backswing. Now, why are swing flaws connected? Well, if you can't get this kind of rotation, how are you going to get the club back? Well, a lot of people will get early wrist set, maybe they'll pull their elbow back. You're going to do something to get the club back. Now, on your downswing, if you can't create that lag by getting your arm stuck to your chest and at the top of your backswing, or even earlier, you want to start rotating forward from your hips so that your hips are dragging your hands through, right? So your hips are dragging your hands through, and you create that natural lag. If you can't get that natural lag, if your hips can't rotate through, well, you got to get the club moving somehow. So a lot of golfers will cast and flip at the ball, and clearly that's not going to work. Now, once you're approaching impact, if your hips are are weak, they can't control the rotational forces coming into impact, so a lot of golfers will stand up. So now we're casting and we're flipping at the ball, and not only are we just casting and flipping, but we can't even stay compressed into the shot, so we stand up. And that's going to create a lot of swing flaws and a lot of errors. At impact, if you can't rotate through and then release that club about 45 degrees or so in front of the impact point, what happens? Well, if your hips are stuck, they're square to impact. So what happens in the follow through? Well, maybe a chicken wing, or as I said, you're standing up at impact, or you have that very wristy kind of armsy movement where it's just all arms and wrist running through the impact point. So those are so many common swing flaws, and they're really caused by lack of hip mobility and lack of hip strength. You have to have the hips leading the way in the golf swing. That's going to protect your back because that creates a nice, fluid, easy swing. Now, if you keep accumulating that type of swing that's very armsy with no hip rotation, all that rotational capacity or the lack of rotational capacity is flowing into your lumbar spine, you're likely going to have some stiffness in your lower back after a round or after a practice session. Keep accumulating that swing year after year, round after round, practice session after practice session, and while there's no guarantees in life, it's a pretty good bet that you're going to have more than just lower back stiffness. You're probably going to have some lower back pain, and worse, some lower back injuries. So if you found that helpful, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We'd really appreciate it. And don't forget, check out other videos on the channel to help you improve your movement quality and keep that useful fluid swing while staying injury-free.